Hi everybody. So today I'm going to do a instructional video on the floating acrylic technique. This is something many of you have asked me to do a specific video on it. You've seen me doing it in pretty much every tutorial, every video that I do, because it is my fallback for shading, for highlighting. I'm just going to show you a few samples where I've used that float technique. This is one where I've both shaded on the outside and highlighted on the inside with white to make those circles look like they're coming out from the background, whereas in fact this is just the same background as this. All I've done is done some shading in there. Here I've done floating acrylic around the letters, again to make them pop out from the background. It's exactly the same treatment inside the letters as outside the letters, and I've done some floating acrylic around the sand dollar as well. This, I'm going to zoom out a little bit, whoop, wrong way of course, is another place that I've done the floating acrylic technique to take this acrylic pour and make these starfish appear. So I've done the darker, the shading on the outside, and I've done highlighting on the inside. And here's one more where I've done shading and highlighting as well. So you're getting the idea that this is a technique that you can use anywhere. The good thing about floating acrylic and why I fall back on it is because I can shade or highlight then with any color that I have in acrylic paint, and it works equally well with the craft paints as the heavy-bodied paints. And it's permanent. As a shading technique, it's permanent. Whereas if you use the Stabilo All pencil or you use charcoal, that is not permanent. If you then go back afterwards and varnish or put anything that is wet, it will reactivate and smudge and smear and potentially wreck your project. Floating acrylic, when it's dry, is permanent because the acrylics are permanent. So I'm just going to grab my supplies and we're going to get started with this tutorial. So what you're going to need to do floating acrylics is an angle brush, and I use most of the time 1/2 inch, 3/8 inch angle brush. You can do it with a 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch flat brush, but I find it's easier to do with the angle brush, and so that's something that I've kind of morphed into. Now, you do not have to break the bank when you're buying these brushes. This one is Royal Langnickel, and it is a 1/2 inch shade or angle brush. And these other two are two different sizes, but they're Craft Smart. They're the Michaels brand. Now I thought I could, save money and get angle brushes at the dollar store, and these are the ones that you get there. But when you look at them, do you see how flimsy these are? The bristles seem to be longer and they're more flimsy. Even I don't find a whole lot of success with these, so I don't use those at all. And I typically, the Craft Smart ones work, the Royal Langnickel. If you get these at Michael's on a 50% off coupon, sometimes you can get them singly, sometimes you can get multiples. Even on small areas, I wouldn't necessarily go smaller than the 3/8 inch. You can get them, and there's the other one that was in the set. And sometimes I might use that, but I find that to get a good floating acrylic technique kind of going, too narrow doesn't necessarily work. Then what you need is either black paint for shading or a dark blue. Sometimes I use Prussian blue a lot, and that's just what I have in this cup here. White for highlighting, black or Payne's Gray, which is a blue black. Now, if I was shading on coral, I could use burgundy paint. So you could use any darker color to shade with that's in that same family. So I could use the darkest green on light green. The sky is the limit, but most of the time we do black and white. So here's the thing that I'm going to mention that I don't know that I've ever specifically addressed. These papers have acrylic paint on them. I've just put color on here. The floating acrylic is not a shading technique you can do if your background is not permanent. So if you've done a watercolor background or some sprays, watercolor crayons, even Inktense blocks, because they don't tend to be permanent right off the bat. Because you are adding water to the page, you'll often end up with a halo effect. So it needs to go, it's acrylic paint on top of acrylic paint. And that's important. If you practice on raw paper, the water will absorb into the paper and you won't get the same effect. With the layer of acrylic paint, it kind of seals the paper and put that coat down, so the water and the paint is going to float on the surface. So these are just mixed media papers, and I put acrylic paint on them, just like I would if I had done a background. There may have been stenciling on here, there may have been modeling paste, there would have been all this other kind of stuff. So I prepared the paper. So you need to do that. Now what we're going to do is just basically set up some practice pages. We want to practice doing that. So I'm just going to take a pencil and give myself some circles, and I'm even going to overlap some, any kind of really basic type shape. Oops, I didn't really. And these lines, for the purpose of this, I'm just practicing, right? So that I'm putting pencil so that you'll be able to see my lines. You can trace these circles, and you've seen me do that on the page with a watercolor pencil that is, water soluble. I also want to, practice. I've got a swivel line here. And this is just for practicing, so I'm just and I'm putting them far enough. And just like everything, you need to practice. So, and sometimes maybe you don't want to do it on a canvas. Now, if this had modeling paste on it or collage papers underneath, there will be texture there, and that's also going to impact how this will work. I'm just going to put some straight lines in here. Not that we're necessarily going to do all of that. So you can see the lines. Nothing special about them, just easy peasy. So we have our angle brush. We have a tub of clean water. So I want some clean water because when I clean off the brushes, I need absolute clean water. And a place to clean the brushes as well. Now I'm going to use my glass media mat. So you could use any glass plate to do that. You can also mix it into the brush with palette paper. And that's all that this is. And that's what I learned on. But a craft mat works as well. So you have options there. You can experiment and see which one is going to work better for for you. I'm actually just going to put some clear water from my water bottle in here to dip the brush, and I'll leave that here so that you can see. Coating acrylic is because you have the paint that's on the palette as well as what you want to see. Okay, so we're going to have that and that. So I'm going to use my 1/2 inch Craft Smart angle brush. And I'm going to use black on this darker background, probably like I would. Now on my palette, you just want a little bit of paint. You do not need a lot, and this does take time. So we have 2 sides to this brush. We have the point, and that is where you're going to dip into the paint. Water goes into the other side. So what I'm going to do is going to put it in the water, the clean water, and get most of it off. Now the other thing you're going to need is a rag or a paper towel. And I just usually keep that in my hand. So then you're going to take the point, this point, and you're going to dip it into the paint. Now I didn't get very much on it. Can you see? It's not a whole lot. And then I'm going to go back and forth on the same track. I'm just going to keep. Now it's not, I don't see the water moving, so I'm just going to dip the other end into the water and come back on the exact same track. And now I can see some of that movement. So I'm going to, basically I'm loading up the brush. Now I'm going to put the point with the paint on next to where I want to shade. And then you have to press. And it's going to run out. I mean, and lots of times you're going around things. So then I'm going to load it up with paint and I'm going to work it in. If it's too dry, I'm going to dip the other side into water and feed it back and forth. Then you're going to come back and you need to press. When it runs out, dip it a little bit in the water, dip it in the paint, back and forth and back and forth. If on here it comes out and it's chalky, you need more water. If it's too fluid, and you'll know that, then you're just going to, and I'm going to deliberately see if I can get this to be too fluid. There's too much water there. You can just dab this up and just touch the water side to your paper towel. And that'll often just take just enough of it off. Now do you see how it's darkest right where I put the tip? And then it kind of bleeds out. That's what you want to achieve. So you put it there. And press. And so you want to set yourself up with this practice sheet. Kind of got it a 2. If you don't like it, you can come in with water fairly quickly. Now again, everything underneath here is always acrylic, permanent. And press. Now, I wouldn't want to go right next to it, because if it's still wet on the page and you come back and touch it, it's going to move it. You can get your heat tool and heat dry it. Back and forth and back and forth. If it's coming out too much like a marker, add a little bit more water. I'm gonna dip this. Oops, sorry for the squeak. Got water on here. Back and forth and back. And some places it's going to be darker, some places it's going to be lighter. It doesn't matter. When this is dry, I can come in and go again, right? If you think, oh, it's too light, and it often dries lighter than what you initially have, I can come in once it's dry and put another layer and build up the depth of color. Now, after a while, your brush is going to get kind of muddled, so clean it in your water tub. You have your clean water, and start the process over. Dip, press, press, pointy end in the paint, back and forth to feed it into the brush. And I just want to go back over this. I want a little bit more, and press. Now the water, when you're pressing, the water's coming out of the brush. So after a short distance, you may have to reload. Add more water, add a little bit more paint. And go. And there you can see I built that one up. So dip, a little bit of water, back and forth, and then even on my craft mat, I might just move that. Let me try this on the palette paper just to show you. And you can get palette paper any art supply store. And you can see that you basically get that float technique. And it's drying. I'm going to dip it. I need a little more water. And then I'm putting it on the edge of where I want it. So it's the same. And you're pressing. You are putting pressure on, and that's what's really difficult. I was trying to analyze why people might be running into troubles with this technique. I'm trying to break down, the steps. Now I may not want to touch the wet edge. I might skip, and then I can come back later. Now a lot of times when I'm doing it, and I'm doing lots of it, I'm not doing it to the letter. And if you Google floating acrylics, you will, can come up with other videos and tutorials on it. One person might just say something. Now say I have way too much water there, so I'm just going to touch the paper towel. And there you have it. Magically, those lines have appeared. So I'm going to continue doing on here, and I'm just going to switch it up to the blue. Sometimes I don't want the black. It may seem too harsh, so that's when I use either Payne's Gray or Prussian Blue, and that's what's in here. Same thing. And I'm going on the outside of the circle. That's a little too much paint. Oops. Got way too much paint on there. So we start fresh. Clean the brush. So it's a dance between getting the right amount of water and paint. So you're adding both of those. And there I might say, oh, it's a little too light. Now if I touch this, I'm going to make a mess. See, it's kind of, so I'd be better off to just be patient and dry. I don't do patient very well, I'm sorry. And there you can see the floating acrylic. Oops, put paint on the wrong side, start over, right? As soon as your brush gets too muddled, then you can see, you know, what you're getting. You clean off your craft mat. Little bit of paint, little bit of water, back and forth. So I'm keeping this real time because it's a tutorial on this technique. I'm trying not to get it into the paint, but get it close enough to this. So I'm going to actually get rid of this paint here. I'm going to zoom in. You know what I'm doing over here, dipping into the water and the paint and touching the paper towel. Okay, so I just want you to focus on this. I want to be able to give this to you in a reasonable closeness. So water on the water side, paint on the point, back and forth, brush on the edge of where you want to put the shading. Now I'm doing the shading I'm going right around the circle. I did the entire line, but you don't necessarily have to. Circles are a good thing to shade around for practicing purposes. And there it's dry, so I can come back in and get that edge. Now I can come and do this circle because everything else is dry. It's kind of chalky, add more paint. I was shading my Julie Nutting doll, so I'm going to put that video up after this so you can see this on something. Okay, we have one more circle here, and then we're going to do some highlighting using the same technique. The only difference is we're using a lighter color. In this case, we will use white. If it makes a mess, just wipe it off. You can, you know, until it's dry, you have a little bit of play time. Often I touch it up with my fingers, you know. Okay. So there we have it. So I'm going to put away the blue, get out the white, and we're going to do some highlighting. Okay, so we're doing the same thing. Dip it in the water, get most of the excess off, point in the paint. Now you're probably not going to see the white on here, but I'm doing the same thing, back and forth on the same line. And then I'm going to, let's just press. A little more paint, a little more water. Often the white will dry very light. You come back, and I like some areas a little brighter white so they have a little more white. That's just how I tend to operate. Let's zoom in a little bit. Running out of paint, running out of water. And you can go either way. You can see if it works better going towards yourself or away. And I often turn, when I'm doing it, I turn my page quite a lot to make it the easiest angle to doing it for. Which is why it's very difficult to videotape. More paint. It kind of got all smudged there a little bit. I don't like how that looks, so I often will come in and just clean it up and start again. I learned how to do the floating technique when I did folk art painting on wood. So back and forth. And there you have. Whoops. And you can see how it almost looks like I have a string that I've collaged on there. Between the highlighting and the shading, it made it look like it's popped up. Let's try the circle. Just clearing off the mat here. Start with a clean brush, dipping in the water, getting the excess off, point in the paint into the white, back and forth and back and forth. Now you can study pictures and, you know, the appropriate places for shading and highlighting shadows and light, I kind of do what looks good to me. I don't follow any formal way. So I may just choose not to do that whole side. Whoops, see, we have that very chalky. So I need more paint, more water, I mean. I do find it a little bit more difficult with the white for some reason. And typically I don't do as much white. But I like how the effect that you get when you do both the black and the white, the light and the dark. And remember, if it goes on too light, you can come back and add more when it's dry. So here, I'm thinking I want a little bit more. So I'm loading up. And press. Paint yourself a couple practice sheets. Put a coat of acrylic paint. Prepare those pages how you would on your art journal pages or on a canvas. Practice on a plain canvas. You can always throw a coat of gesso on there afterwards. Canvas will give differently than a canvas board, than an art journal page. I hope you found this useful. Give me a thumbs up. Leave me a comment if you give this a try. Let me know how it goes for you. Bye for now.